I guess I'll get started. So thanks so much for coming. This is, I've been doing this for a couple of years now, and it's always really nice to kind of see people come to this event and then kind of meet them again a year later or a couple of years later as PhD students. And I've actually had a couple of people this year say that the reason they were doing a PhD, part of it was because they came along to this event. So it's always nice to feel like it's useful. So this is our kind of advertisement for doing a PhD in computer science. It's kind of like, what's it like to do a doctorate, and why would you might want you to do a doctorate, or what's actually involved. I'm Mike Dodds. I'm the research student training officer. I'm also a lecturer in the department. I do sort of concurrency theory and sort of verification things. That's just a plug for doing a PhD with me. So it's what we're going to do today is I'm going to talk a bit, and then Fiona, who's our head of research over here, she's going to, head of research studies, who's over here, is going to talk. And then we've got a few current and former PhD students who'll talk a bit about what their experience of doing a PhD was and what they're doing or what they did. We've got someone from IBM who did a PhD with us. And hopefully we'll get it in sort of under an hour. And at the end, then we've got tea and cakes. And if you'd like to come and chat to me or Fiona or any of the PhDs, oh, you're going to be gone. If you'd like to talk to me or arrange a meeting with Fiona, then or the PhD students, then I would suggest that's a good idea, because really you have to talk to somebody to kind of know what research is like. So if you have questions and comments afterwards, then we have a lovely recruitment website. You can email me, or there's the University of York CS Twitter feed, or I'm on Twitter. Get in touch if you'd like to, if you have questions. So okay, so I guess the thing that I wanted to get across is, what is a doctorate, and what's it like to do one? It's been a few years since I did my doctorate, and it's been 10 years, depressingly. But it was a very interesting and very formative experience. I actually did it in this department with Detlef. So I'm kind of like a second generation York person. I don't know if we've got any third generation York people looking for us at the moment, but I'm sure it's not too long before that happens. So what's a doctorate, and why would you want to do it? Well, really, a doctorate is about, in your undergraduate education, you're going to have learned an awful lot about kind of a lot of subjects in computer science. A doctorate's really about becoming a world expert on a particular area. So like finding one of those areas that really interests you, and then just sort of like focusing like a laser beam on that thing. And it's really an in-depth exploration of that topic. And so the effect at the end of a doctorate is that you're probably going to know more than your supervisor. You're probably going to know more than anybody else in the world about that one thing. And that's kind of a really thrilling thing about research, is that actually the frontiers of human knowledge are not as far away as you think. If you pick the right topic, you can kind of really contribute to human knowledge. And the emphasis really is on the unknown. You kind of want to know something that nobody knows yet. You want to, and that's again, it's sort of very different in a way from an undergraduate degree. So there's a nice kind of diagram that Matthew Might, who's a professor in Utah, drew. So here's this extremely detailed diagram of human knowledge, and this all the stuff in the circle. Okay, so when you're at school, what you learn is like the sort of core stuff. You learn your sort of adding up and taking away and all that kind of stuff. And then as you kind of go, you go along, you sort of learn to read and write, and all that, you learn about kind of great books of literature, and you learn about computer science, and you learn about Perl, and kind of all, do you learn Perl even? Python, whatever it is that the kids learn these days. And then you get more knowledge, and maybe you start to specialize. So you decide computers are really your thing, or French poetry is really your thing. And so you kind of know more, and you kind of get closer to these kind of frontiers of knowledge. And then when you start to kind of do a PhD, what you're going to do is you're just going to sort of like start learning more and more about a particular subject. And then you're going to kind of get closer and closer to the kind of edge of knowledge, with the point at which we don't know the answers to any of those questions. And then what your PhD is going to be is basically, it's going to be you pressed right up against the frontiers of knowledge. And then if your PhD goes well, this is going to happen. And then eventually, we're going to end up with you end up with kind of more knowledge. We end up with this kind of frontier here, getting a little bit wider, broader. And that's a lovely thing. The idea that you've written something, the thrill of finding something out that nobody else knows, that is extremely thrilling. I always find that very nice. When you prove a theorem or something, and you think, wow, I'm the first person to know this. It's awesome. So it's going to look like this when you're doing it. But actually, the big picture is, you're kind of pushing on the outskirts of knowledge, really. That's what a PhD is. So it's a different sort of flavor from undergraduate education. So you'll already, I suspect many of you will be doing final year projects, or you'll be doing you'll have done sort of small projects. And so those have a bit of the same flavor as a PhD. However, there are sort of a few differences. So when you're in the undergraduate degree, you're going to have sort of classes, but the thing is that if you get stuck, then your supervisor, then the classes are about known techniques. You can probably look them up in a book. If you're doing a PhD, no one knows the answer, so it's your techniques, it's your approach. You have to make up within parameters, you have to kind of make up those techniques yourself. In the classes, all the problems are kind of specified for you, and even in a final year project, that's often true. Whereas in a PhD, what's happening is that you have to make up the problems. The problems are defined by you. So it's something that, and you have to find a good problem as well. So you can't just sort of say, oh, well, give me a question and I'll sort of then do the answer. You have to kind of find the question as well. In classes, you can compare your answers to other people. And of course, in research, you compare your answers to other people as well, because that's what the research literature is. But nobody else has solved your problem. So you can't go and look up the answer if you get stuck. And if you get stuck on the problem in a class, you can go to the person teaching it, and you can say, well, this question's really hard. And they'll say, OK, yeah, it is. But here's the answer. You're fine. I mean, probably, if we're teaching one of your classes, we probably won't do that, because we tend to like to get you to answer the question yourself. But in principle, you could do that. But in research, even your supervisor won't know the answer. You're trying to find an answer that nobody knows. And in research, unlike in classes, you don't get grades. So you'll get a PhD at the end of it, but you're not going to get a kind of a sort of 86% PhD or a 45% PhD. You get a PhD or not a PhD. Really, it has to be about you. It's about kind of your research and what you're going to do. You're going from the kind of world of being a kind of student who works on kind of problems set by other people to problems that are really set by yourself. So why would you want to do a doctorate, aside from the just sort of, sheer intellectual thrill of it? Well, I think the intellectual thrill is a big part of it. But really, a lot of it is about kind of getting your research driving license. It's about moving from the point where you know how to do a few bits of research. You've done a little bit for the final year project, but you actually know how to the point where you can do research. You can create new knowledge, and there are lots of places in the world where that kind of skill is really valuable. So you can pursue an academic or an industrial research career, but lots of our PhD students actually go into other kinds of careers. Lots of them go to other places. I'll talk about that in a second. And the other thing is, I suppose, is the kind of intellectual thrill and the idea of making a contribution to humanity or to kind of the understanding of the world. So you could come up with something that ends up in a billion Android devices. You could end up with something that ends up being in textbooks for the next 100 years or 1,000. If you're Euclid, for the next 2,000 years, maybe one of you is secretly Euclid Mark II. So why would you do a doctorate here? Aside from, I think that many of you are undergraduates here. Well, you'll know if you're undergraduates here that York is a very nice city. We've got a very nice department here. We're also we're a very strong research department. We've got a load of research groups which are really world-class research groups. So, and that's something which you don't get in every university, but you really will be able to. You will able to get supervision from some of the world-leading experts in the areas that you do research. You also kind of get to, one of the things that's, I think, a bit distinctive about York is that we try to treat the research students as colleagues rather than as students. I mean, there's obviously, you have a supervisor, and your supervisor is kind of, in a sense, the same as your undergraduate supervisor. But really, when you're a PhD student, we would like you to be treated as sort of as a person who's a part of the kind of research community, that's part of the kind of, the research and teaching program. So, contributing to teaching and contributing to the wider events and contributing to the social events. There's quite a lot of nice things going on at the moment with different social things in the research students. We're also one of the largest doctoral communities in the university. So we're a pretty big department, but we're a really big kind of community of doctoral students. And that's nice, because it means that if you get stuck, or if you're kind of feeling a bit you're flagging a bit and you're not kind of knowing where to go, there's always someone you can talk to who is at a similar kind of stage. You're not just stuck talking to your advisor and there are more people down the corridor. There's a large number of doctoral students. How many are we now, Fiona?
Somebody said 150, I thought it was 60, but I'm not in charge.
It's somewhere between 60 and 150, says the chair of research studies. So, one thing that I really want to make clear is that a doctorate is really not just training to be academic faculty. And maybe at some point in the sort of 1930s, then that was the case. You did a doctorate, and then you went on to become faculty, and they sort of locked you in an ivory tower, and you were never seen again. That's not been true for many, many years, but it's certainly not true now. Our students go on to a very wide variety of places. And in fact, that's true of all people who do doctorates. So this is UK science PhD students, what their destinations were 3 years on. So you'll notice that quite a lot of people are in higher education in one way or another. This is this big blue segment here. But there's also quite a lot of people in finance and business and IT. There's quite a lot of people in manufacturing over here. Research and development, which is sort of private research and development, there's about 10% of people over here. But it's kind of one of the things to really take away from this is it's really quite, there's quite an even split. It's not like there's a big dominant, one segment is very dominant, aside from the lots of people who are in higher education or other kinds of education. There's a big variety of what people do after science PhDs. And in fact, it couldn't be anything other than that, really, because about 86 of doctoral students end up outside of academia. So this is the number of PhDs being awarded, and this is the number of faculty places. So clearly that people aren't going into faculty positions. Basically what's happening is that people are doing doctorates and they're doing other things. They're going and working for Google, they're going and working for kind of biomedical startups, they're going and working in Silicon Valley. They're doing lots of exciting things that are to do with kind of generating new knowledge and generating new ideas. So you might be thinking, well, okay, that sounds wonderful. Or maybe you sat there thinking, well, that sounds terrible. But anyway, you might be wondering, why would you want to supervise a doctorate? What's in it for me and Fiona and all the other academics in the department? Well, I mean, the doctorate, the relationship between a doctoral student and a supervisor is actually, it's again quite different from an undergraduate supervisor. So it's more like a mentorship relationship. So you're kind of going from the point where where you're just starting in research to the point where you really are sort of, you can become a fully fledged researcher. And from our perspective, it's very kind of, it's really nice to sort of see a new scholar kind of starting to generate new ideas. It's also kind of useful for people who are building, it's useful for people who are building teams of researchers. So there are several academics who have really quite large groups of people working on the same ideas, and that's often a nice place to work because you get to work with the other PhD students and postdocs. And generally, it's more about kind of being able to mentor someone as they kind of start out in academic research. That's really the excitement of it, I think. So I'm going to talk about this very briefly, and then I'll hand over to Fiona. So the doctorate's really, our doctorates are 3 years. Some people tend to run over, but we really try to discourage you from doing that. But it's sort of broadly split up like this. You'll start out with a literature review, which is there to help make sure that you're not replicating someone else's work. And then you'll sort of start exploring ideas. So the first year is often, people don't work on precisely the thing that they end up working on because they're just kind of finding out exactly what the right kind of research is. And then as time goes on, you start to focus on a topic. You start to sort of come up with a sort of hypothesis that you really want to work on. So, the point at which you're pressing up against those frontiers of knowledge. And then as you're going to write papers and sort of publish them in conferences. One of the nice things about being a PhD student is that there are often opportunities to travel to interesting places, and because conferences happen all over the world. And then you're right at the end of this, then you've got to write your thesis and defend it at a viva. And the viva is sort of the point at which you kind of, in other countries it's called the defense. So it's called the defense because basically you have to sort of say, well, look, I did this cool thing, and and then to the people in your research community, you have to say, well, okay, well, explain to me why this is true, and then you say, oh, yeah, well, you see, it's like this. And so it's kind of an opportunity to kind of be judged by your peers and to show that you've really reached that stage of being a fully fledged academic. So so that's really what a doctorate is. I'm actually going to pause questions for a second because I know that Fiona has to head off very soon. But there'll be opportunities for questions after this and also after the PhD students. So I will hand over to Fiona.
As usual, microphones aren't designed for people who don't actually.
Okay with that. Right, so I'm going to do some of the boring stuff, I'm afraid. I'm going to talk about the funding side and some of the other opportunities that are available. At the PhD, although it is very much a free-form 3 years, there are some fairly well-defined guidelines as to how to get through it. We call them milestones. They're roughly every 6 months you have a milestone. But let's focus a bit on funding for a moment. So there are many ways of getting funding. So if at the moment you're thinking, I imagine, about, I've got this idea, I'd like to do a doctorate, or I think I fancy working with the real-time group, I wonder what's available and so on. And that's what comes out of this contact session for you. But at some point, you and or the person who might end up supervising you is going to be thinking about how we're going to fund 3 years, fees, stipend. There's a continuation year built into the university system, which, as Mike says, you're not supposed to use, but quite a lot of people do. That has a minimal cost associated with it, but you still have to pay for yourself. So the department gets a small amount of funding for PhD students each year. Comes in a number of flavours. Our biggest income is the EPSRC Doctoral Training Group. So EPSRC is one of the UK funding councils for research. They hand out a bucket of money to the university, which is based on things like how many people actually completed doctorates in the previous 2 or 3 years, how much other grant funding we get from the PSRC and the other research councils. The university then hands out some of that to the departments, depending on how many of our students pass their doctorate in 3 years, etc. The DTG is quite generous. The EPSRC recognises that students have to live, so they give you a decent stipend, and it's around 13,000 or 14,000. They pay your UK fees for you, and they also provide sort of money for travelling to conferences and so on. The department, out of its own income, which, I mean, we have quite a lot of money passing through, but there's not a lot of profit in the department. So out of our profit, as it were, we're allowed to provide funding for students who aren't eligible for the EPSRC doctoral training grant. And typically that's people from quite a lot of the European Union who might come here on home fees but aren't actually eligible for UK funding council money. And most people who come from overseas. So we have an annual DERS, Departmental European Research Studentship, which pays the fees at UK rate, EU UK rate. So it'll pay the whole of the fees side. But if you're eligible for that, you need to look at getting your own stipend, your own living costs. And then we have 2 doors for overseas research students who aren't eligible for DERS and therefore aren't eligible for DTG either. And those are the top-up from UK EU fees level. So I think it works out at about 10,000 or something per annum in fees. And again, you have to find your own stipend. Those we allocate competitively. We've tightened up the competitive aspect of it this year because we have to. In order to go into the funding round within the department, you really need to be trying to get an application in this term, or certainly by the 15th of January. So If you are seriously interested in doing a doctorate and you are looking at us possibly funding that, you need to be talking to a supervisor or talking to a research group, narrowing down a supervisor, tying down a topic, writing a good research proposal. And if you go to our entries website, the details of what you have to do to apply are there. You basically apply through a university, but we also need a good proposal, a definite indication of a supervisor or supervisors, and a clear statement that you're actually applying for departmental funding. If you're not looking for funding, you can apply at any time. You know, you can apply today or you can apply in July, and we'll assess you on your academic credentials. But then it's up to you to find funding from other sources. If you are wanting to apply in the funding round, we're going to announce the funding decisions on the 23rd of February. This is a departmental step forward. We used to do it arbitrarily at any time when we felt like it. We will tell you on the 23rd of February if you've gone into the funding round whether you've got funding. That's the departmental funding. The competition will be looking for the best students who actually support the objectives of the department, the things that we want to move forward on. Don't be too hooked on the preference here. The preference is there so that if we get 2 PhD applicants who are absolutely stellar, one is from an area that the department's really keen on, and one's an area that the department really has nobody working in, we know which one to go to. We're not convinced that we're going to have serious competition that's going to allow us to have to look at our preferences, but the preferences are there to reflect the things that the department thinks it's putting its money into. So the Advanced Architectures group are, that's essentially it's Jim Austin's group, who you've probably never met because he's not around very much, but it's the people who are looking at low-level architectures, highly parallel architectures, novel architectures, and interesting ways in which the Department of Computer Science can provide the future in computer architecture. The real-time group, I'm guessing most people will know, that's the big group led by Alan Burns, who've been world leaders in real-time systems since it was invented, and are still doing amazing things on high-performance, low-level platforms and the programming languages that go with them. The Enterprise Systems group are looking at large-scale complex IT systems generally. They're also looking at cloud platforms, open source, model-driven engineering, the cutting edge of software engineering. And one of the reasons they're on that list is because they have a very strong link with industrial research, which is something which is very important to the department generally. The High Integrity Systems Engineering group overlaps with this group, and that's the safety type areas, which the department's also a world leader in. The department's also very interested in interdisciplinary research, and this may not be something you've actually thought of, but often if somebody's looking at, for example, an AI area, you often find that the area has an application, and the application might be an important part of the doctorate. Or if you're looking at novel computation, you might be looking at a bio-inspired form of computation. You might be looking at biology as well as computation, for instance. So this is where we come in the interdisciplinary research. And we're actually one of very few departments, I think we may be the only one in the university that actually headlines that we're prepared to give our departmental money to pay for doctoral students to do interdisciplinary PhD projects. So it's quite a serious part of our research profile and something that we will put money into. So as I say, don't get too hung up on those topic areas. If you're looking at functional programming or graph grammars, or I know Detlef is extremely keen for me to plug graph grammars, the fact that it's not covered under those headings doesn't mean we won't fund you. Just go for it, get the best proposal you can. Work with the supervisor to get a really, really strong profile. There is a separate set of funding, which Matt will tell you a little bit more about the programme in a moment. IGI, Intelligent Games and Games Intelligence, it's called a Doctoral Training Centre. You've probably, if you've been exploring PhDs generally, you've probably come across doctoral training centres. They're dedicated programs designed to educate people in areas that the funder thinks are of benefit to either their profile or the UK. IGGY's funded by the same group as we talked about before, the EPSRC, the Funding Council. There are other doctoral training centres funded by big charities, for example, the Wellcome Trust and so on. Typically, I'll leave Matt to tell you more about that later, hopefully, yeah? Typically, there's more structure, but you end up doing a thesis at the end in the same way, and those are often pushing into even more novel areas than the conventional PhDs because they're a focused programme which is aiming to improve something, either the UK's capacity or that particular charity's capacity in an area that they seek to lead the world in. So intelligent games and games intelligence covers the whole range of games and AI and is very popular with computer scientists because they tend to like playing games. But they're not all computer scientists, are they? If you're still looking for funding, but either you don't get departmental funding or you don't meet the criteria or you're too late, there are lots of other ways to, the university has a few specific grants. There are lots of other sources of funding depending on, you might have a particular background which makes you eligible for a particular charity's funding and so on. The university postgraduate admissions pages gives lots of information about different sources of funding. But equally, if you're working in a particular area, you're talking to a particular supervisor, they may have information also about particular companies that are looking to co-sponsor a PhD student, or other ways in which you might be able to get your pet topic funded. So it is worth doing, get some practice, do some research. It is worth researching around, Googling, searching web pages, and especially talking to people about what's available. I would strongly recommend also looking at doctoral training centres, not just IGGY, but this one, Combating Infectious Diseases. I knew that one had fallen off the end, Mike. What does it say? Can you remember what it says? I think, I can't remember what it stands for. Sorry, we knew that one had fallen off the end. But this is a doctoral training centre based in biology, but it also has strong links with electronics, chemistry, computer science, and at least one other department, probably physics. And this is a doctoral training centre aimed at taking technically competent non-biologists into the biological area. This is, Mike had his little plug. My little plug is that I'm really interested in simulating complex biological systems, and they've supported quite a lot of that area of work.
Translational science, by the way.
Translational science. So combating infectious diseases, computational approaches in translational science. Right. Thank you. I thought you were telling me I'd overrun. I knew that. Hi, Jason. Just to finish with, we're talking a lot about PhDs. There are other research degrees that you can do, and you can apply for those through the same sort of routes as you do for a PhD. You go through the same sort of process, you talk to supervisors, you decide on a topic and so on. The key ones to mention are the two master's level qualifications in research. An MSc by research is a one-year degree. For those of you on the MEng or math programs, it's going a bit further than further in extent, but not further in level than what you're doing for your math or MEng. It's a pure research project, but you're studying at master's level, so it's the same sort of level as math or MEng. In Mike's diagram, your little sticking out bit that goes out beyond the edge of knowledge, you don't have to go beyond the edge of knowledge. You can stop halfway to the edge of known knowledge. It's roughly what master's level means. Again, it's a fairly structured program. It's a one-year program with a little bit of overrun possible. Obviously, it's a lot cheaper, but there is much less funding available from institutions. The department doesn't have any. You might be able to get grants for that, I'm not sure, or loans for the MSc by research. So if you're not sure whether you want to do a research degree or you have a relatively modest idea, that's a one-year option for exploring research, perhaps getting yourself an MSc. The MPhil is often seen as the dropout degree for a PhD, but if you read the university's description of it, it says it's a more substantial master's level degree, and it represents a substantial piece of research, but it doesn't have to take you out onto the frontier of knowledge. So it's master's level, you can be working to pull things together from the known universe, as it were. You don't have to make such a huge novel contribution. It's a 2-year programme. Again, there is no funding generally for MPhil, but it's another option if you're not sure that you want to commit to a 3-year programme that's taking you beyond the frontier of knowledge. And the other thing to note about both of those is that you can transfer to and from PhD. So some people find that the idea of buying into a 3 or 4 year degree with no get out is very challenging. We've got a number of students in the department at the moment who have either started on an MSc by research and then either part way through that or after that done a PhD. We've also got some who've transferred off a PhD onto an MSc or occasionally an MPhil because they haven't actually got the drive and the enthusiasm or the money to actually complete the 3 or 4 years of the PhD. They've decided it's not for them. So you don't have to get 3-4 years and a thesis and a viva in order to get a qualification out of a research degree. Okay, I'm sorry I can't hang around to ask questions. I need to go to the Board of Studies meeting because if there's a quickie, yeah. Any quickies?
Okay.
Right. You can contact me anytime, Fiona.Polack as usual at CS.
Okay. So I guess are there any questions at the moment, or should we just move on to the PhD students? There's a silence, so I'm going to assume that that's kind of a positive silence. And sorry, yeah. Does it grant you a career in guarantee a career in research? Well, it depends what you mean by guarantee. I mean, it's certainly there are a lot of jobs which are research jobs in one way or another. So industrial research or academic research. I think that a large number of people who do PhDs end up in academic or industrial research one way or another. On the other hand, the research environment is very changeable. So it may be that it becomes more easier or difficult to get a career in research in future. But certainly a PhD is a good, is the right way to, if you want to do research, pretty much a prerequisite, I think, is having a PhD. That would be my view of it. I mean, certainly maybe Jason could sort of speak to this kind of thing. So does that sort of answer your question? Okay. Anybody else? Okay. There'll be another chance for questions later on. But now we can have Matthew.
Hello, I'm Matthew. So I did my undergrad here in CS and AI, and then I moved on to the IGGI program doing a PhD. So Fiona mentioned IGGI a bit previously. It's a doctoral training center. Well, technically it's a center for doctoral training, which is different, but same sort of thing. So it's a 4-year PhD. 4-year is both the soft and hard deadline. So usually with a PhD, it's 3 years is what you're kind of meant to do. And at 4 years, they tell you to get out. With IGGI, it's 4 years, they tell you to do it in that. And after that, they still tell you to get out. Which contains strong industry IGGI contains strong industry links, and it contains taught components across 3 universities. So the CDT itself is spread across University of York, University of Essex, and Goldsmiths, University of London. So it's a bit different to the normal sort of PhD that you can do. And it's also quite wide in scope for a CDT. So it's anything to do with games. For me, that's games AI. So my research topic is trying to take this AI technique, which is used a lot in universities, and try and make it so it actually feeds back into the game industry. So there's this thing called Monte Carlo tree search, and I'm trying to make it so that you can actually use that in commercial games. But IGGI takes on people in a whole world of different areas. So there's someone looking at the emotive effects of avant-garde video games. There's someone looking at linguistics and video games and stuff like that. So there's a very wide scope for the sort of stuff that you can do in IGGY. Yeah, and the main thing which I think makes IGGY a cool program is the interactions with games companies. So at the moment, Microsoft Studios, Team 17, and Lionhead are trying to see if they can get my research into their big commercial shipped games, because the CDT has made it so that I have access to lots of resources so I can do good research, but also that I have access to companies and companies have access to my research. So it's a really good relationship in that way. And I don't know what else to say because I didn't plan this talk. So thank you.
Does anyone have any quick questions just while we're here?
I'll loiter around afterwards as there's cake.
We'll have a chance at the end as well.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Matthew. And this is Sam. Have fun.
Why do I?
You can sort of click onto something. Yeah, that works. And then just you can hold that.
Okay, hi, I'm Sam. I'm an NGD student, engineering doctoral student, which is a program that's not running anymore, but I'm doing stuff with games as well, although I started mine before IGGY was launched. So my title for my research at the moment is, my research question is, can a computer game help to deliver DBT? So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how that works and the approach that I'm using. So I'm in the human-computer interaction group, and you might think, well, hang on a minute, I'm a computer scientist, why do you want to bring the humans into this? So this is why. This is why humans and users are really important, because if you look at this, the designers have thought, I know what's needed here, and they've made this pathway without talking to the users. The users have got other needs and wants, and you can see from the path there. So in human-computer interaction, we put our users at the center, and my users are people that have quite serious mental illness. They've got something called borderline personality disorder. I work with a psychiatric hospital up the road there. These people are outpatients, and they have quite serious problems. The mental illness means that they have very strong emotional responses, which means that they have things like self-harming behaviours and sometimes even suicidality. So obviously it's very serious. And for a long time there was no help for this illness, but then in the early 90s this therapy was introduced, and it's actually been very successful, but it's quite a hard therapy to learn. It's very big, and it takes about 2 years working with the therapy, with the skills, to try and understand what's going on. So I've spent the last year at the hospital trying to learn how the therapy works. And hopefully now what I'm going to do is put some of these skills into a game that is going to sit alongside the therapy, that the patients can play, and will help them to understand the skills, use the skills, and practice the skills. Okay? Any questions?
Okay, perfect. Jason, I think you're up now. And there we go. A lovely conference diagram.
It's my university engagement jacket. That's how I know what I'm doing. Does that work?
Yes.
Cool. So, my name is Jason Reich. I graduated in 2014 with my PhD, and this was the square that kept me up at night. So this is actually not very complicated. So I've got a source program, and I compile it. And when I run it, it means something. But does it mean what I meant it to? Was the compiler correct? And I could go into great detail about how I solved this and what I did about it. But what's more important is the experience. So I got to work with Colin Runciman and Richard Page, which was brilliant fun. I was also funded by the L6 Doctoral Training Centre, like Sam, which is brilliant because you got to meet loads of people all over the country. As you can see, it was a wide-ranging doctoral training centre, which is, well, neither of us really do anything to do with large-scale, complex IT systems. But hey, they gave us money. That's what's important. which was brilliant fun. I got to travel the world while thinking about this square. I went as far as Russia and the States, going to conferences, meeting brilliant new people and talking to them about this square. And at the end of it, I came up with a somewhat satisfiable answer. Satisfactory answer, I suppose. And my examiners thought it was good. Now, the reason why I'm wearing the jacket is because I'm now an industry sellout. I didn't go into academia. I work for IBM down in the far corridor, which is why it was easy enough to get me to come upstairs. But as we were saying, getting a PhD or an NGD is by no means necessary or sufficient to academic research or even industrial research. I don't do industrial research either. I'm just in development. But the skills are transferable. What I'd say is, I mean, if there's something you really want to learn, this is going to be the best way of doing it. This is your self-directed learning. You can go off in the directions you want to. And normally the question you end up looking at is not the one you go in with, which is great. You know, that's a really good learning experience, and the PhD is unlike any other way of doing that. It is a good gateway into academia. We know academics who haven't done it, but they are rare. But also, not all people who do PhDs become academics, and that's fine as well. There's more money in industry. It's brilliant. But how many have we got? I think we've got 6 PhDs in my office now, 1 MPhil. You know, none of us you know, are crying about it. You know, we all enjoyed the learning experience. Now we're doing something different, and we've brought over what we can. Some of this stuff, actually, I have been able to integrate into my work. Some bits I haven't, but that's not the reason why you're doing the research, is it? You're doing it because you have a pressing question you want answered. So I guess that's all I can really say about it. Are there any questions? Wow, quiet audience today.
You just answered all their questions, obviously.
Yes.
IBM really are just hiring our PhD students at a rate of knots. It's how is it, 3 more of them in the last couple of months, or is it?
Oh, yeah, actually, yeah, no, it's going to be
Yeah. Okay. Okay, Adolfo. You've not chosen a microphone-friendly garment, I'm afraid.
Don't worry. I will manage, I guess. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Adolfo Sanchez-Barbudo, and I'm doing a doctorate in engineering in the enterprise systems group. My main interest basically is around model-driven engineering, code generation, these kind of things. And particularly my topic is related to tools, basically trying to improve the tools for software language engineers so that they can foster its productivity in order to create textual languages and all the tools that they require to work with them. So this is a very simple example with a very trivial textual language for which we would like good-looking or nice, high-quality editors with syntax coloring, with code completion, with a kind of outline to see the structure of your language, these kind of things. And the idea is trying to allow the engineers to create these tools as much as fast as possible. So while doing a doctorate, I'm not going to repeat the things that Mike said in the beginning, but I would like to remark the expertise topic, because as you can imagine, after 3 years of hard work on a very specific topic, will give you a very good position whenever somebody requires a person to work on that. So if you are clever enough to select a very interesting topic, probably that will give you a lot of, to open a lot of doors to work in the future. Regardless, it's, as Jason said, it's academia or industry. And what else? Well, basically also recognition. For example, I have, during this is my 3rd year. During this time, for example, I have been promoted as a committer in one of the official Eclipse projects related to modeling. You can see your name in important standards that are used by the industry. Another good thing that that Mike also mentioned is traveling. So you have the opportunity to show your work around the world. I have also been, well, I went in Canada actually, not the United States, but I went to Canada, Spain, Valencia, Italy. So it's a good opportunity to travel around, which is nice. And also to increase your network of contacts, because by doing this kind of conference, presenting your work, we'll be able to meet new people, and this undoubtedly will help you in the future, in your future, when you decide what to do with your professional career. And yeah, that's more or less what I wanted to say. So.
Okay, so would anybody like, does anyone have any questions just for the PhD students at the moment? If you do have any questions, I would suggest that you catch them after the event, because I'm sure they'd be happy to chat over coffee. And well, you can have a quarter of the cakes in return for your participation in this event. Okay, so I've totally sold you on the idea of doing a PhD and you're raring to go. So what now? Well, okay, the first thing is that generally when you apply for a PhD, you don't just apply for a PhD in general, you apply for a particular area. And so that means probably you need to sort of think about what kind of area you want to do research in. So for those of you who signed up for this event, I got you to fill in a checklist of the areas you're interested in. So we're going to follow up about that. If any of you haven't signed up or you wanted to change what you were interested in, please just fill in one of these paper forms and leave it with myself or Edith, and we'll put that into the system. But you'll also you can also look at the websites for these research groups, and that will give you an idea of the sort of areas that they're interested in. There are little pocket summaries on this on this form as well. As Fiona says, interdisciplinary is also something that we're really interested in. Now, interdisciplinary is a very sort of awkward word because it sort of means anything basically. But obviously, computer science has very strong connections with places like electronics and places like biology, quantum physics. We've got a new quantum hub which is doing interesting things. There are good connections with sort of sociologists through the HCI group. So any of those kind of areas, if what you're thinking is kind of, well, I like computer science, but I also like blah-de-blah, then come and talk to us, because maybe we can suggest something that's at the intersection between what you're interested in. It doesn't have to be, and the more that you can kind of present possibilities yourself, the more that we can help you with this. So yeah, the first thing to say is, if you haven't filled in a sign-up sheet, fill one in. We'll send you an email. We'll be in touch very shortly. Bear in mind that the deadline this year is pretty soon. It's the 15th of January, and by that point you have to have submitted a proposal. You also have to have something in the university system. So if you want to go for a PhD and be considered for funding, you really need to do that, as soon as possible. But you need to sort of start looking around for a supervisor immediately. Talk to people now over tea. I mean, I'm sure that there are questions that I haven't covered. I'm sure that there are, I think that my advice in general about doing a PhD is it's something that you should go into having spoken to people who are doing PhDs and have done PhDs, because lots of PhDs are very different. It's a very personal relationship with your supervisor as well. So you have to kind of it's a good idea if you're thinking about a particular supervisor to talk to that supervisor's students and sort of say, are they okay? Are they, what do they like? Do they work in this way? Well, I work in that way. And maybe you find that even though you're both nice people and you're both kind of well-intentioned, that it doesn't work out. Maybe you find out that it's perfect for you and they want to work in exactly the way that you want to work. And so talking to myself or Edith or any of the students here, we can set you right in that regard. Look at staff web pages. This is my web page here. That's another plug for me. Lots of, you can't quite see it here. There's a button here that says PhD applications. Lots of people have on their website descriptions of the kinds of projects they're interested in, descriptions of the kinds of ideas that they would like to kind of work on. I think you'll find that if you email one of the staff members directly, they'll be more than happy to talk to you about this. I mean, almost everyone is keen to supervise PhD students. It's one of the great pleasures of academia is working with PhD students. get in touch with someone directly. I'm sure they'll be interested in talking to you. If you're really stuck and you think kind of, well, I want to work on kind of the sociology of widgets, but I don't know whether there's a widget sociologist in the department, then email me and I'll try and matchmake. Because, I mean, the field of research, in some ways, it can be quite impenetrable. You can sort of end up going like, well, I don't know if this is related to this. You know, talk to me. I'll be able to help. So that's pretty much the end of the session. So if there are any questions for me, or unfortunately Fiona has had to go, but I can sort of stand as her proxy, I'm sure, and for the students, then yeah, please, any questions? Oh, no, that's fine. I just... Yeah, so you have to, when you're submitting your application, this is maybe a little unclear because the university sort of says that the proposal has to come from you. But in point of fact, what mostly happens is that you and the person who would like to supervise you, or the people who you'd like to supervise you, get together and you kind of refine a proposal together. So, you know, you maybe have an idea and you sort of write a proposal, and then you send it to one of the person who has agreed that they're interested in supervising you, and that person says, well, okay, but maybe you could improve it by doing this, or maybe you could improve it by doing that. So we certainly don't expect you to kind of come up with a proposal just out of thin air that's perfect. So that's another reason why finding someone who is willing to supervise you early is a really good idea, because then you can kind of talk to them and kind of refine what you're going to say, and then produce something that's going to be really good. Sure.
For you, what was the most enjoyable aspect of your PhD?
Oh, I almost want to say, you know, the moment when I finished my Viva, but there were lots of fun things. I think the thing that I really like is, I guess, that moment of discovery, you know, when you kind of, so there were a couple of moments during my PhD where I had a problem that I was really stuck on, and I'd sort of been throwing everything against it. And then sort of, you know, often it wasn't even like when I was working, it was like kind of in the shower or something, and I just kind of was sort of like, and it's a lovely kind of feeling. Or, you know, and similar, you know, I've had that experience again many times as an academic, you know, not many times, but, you know, sort of, you know, a few times as an academic where you just have a really great idea and you think kind of, wow, that's a really great idea. And one of the really nice things about a PhD and kind of academic research in general is that often you can follow those enthusiasms, you can kind of chase them down to their sort of conclusion. Whereas, I mean, you know, if you're working for, you know, with all respect to IBM, if you're sitting in IBM and you think, oh, I've got a great idea about type theory, well, they're probably not going to pay you to work on your really great idea about type theory. So I think that's the thing that really, you know, that's the thing that really excites me about research. Other questions? Do any of you guys want to make any sort of follow-up comments or anything like that? I mean, I think you...
Just leading on from what you were saying as well, those, wow, you know, I've got a really great idea and it's fantastic, but also the small moments when you, like, you read something and you go, oh, that's so cool, I didn't know that. Or you put two things together and you realise that, oh, that means that. Those moments are really exciting as well.
Actually, the other thing that I find really exciting about research is working with people. So, and that's because, you know, you can be cleverer as two people than you can be as one person, and that's a kind of really sort of remarkable thing when you kind of, you know, you say, oh, I don't understand this, and then you talk to someone else and they say, oh, I don't understand it either, and then you kind of somehow, you are cleverer as two people than one person, and you kind of, at the end of the day, you're kind of sitting there going like, well, I don't remember who came up with this idea, and it sort of wasn't either of us, because neither of us are that clever, but, you know, between us, we're kind of able to come up with this thing. That's a kind of really thrilling thing to kind of feel like they're sort of, you know, doing it sort of in the space between two people. That's or more people. That's really, really fun.
My favourite day of my PhD is when the colleague and that neighbour locked ourselves in a room for 8 hours just working on a problem that came out of the paper. No, it is. You don't get to do that really anywhere else. When you come finish a PhD, everyone's almost too busy, or you've got heat or, there's all other things getting in the way. When for PhD, it's all together, it's quite nice.
Yeah. Have you guys got favourite things? Don't want to put you on the spot here, but...
meeting lots of research students doing similar but very different things. So particularly with IGGY, it's not just computer scientists that are around all the time. So it's having lots of people with different viewpoints and different places that they're coming from, which somehow you still manage to make helpful in your research. It's hard to explain.
You're generally around, I mean, I find you're around, as in an academic department, an incredibly creative and varied sort of gang of people, and that's one of the other pleasures. It's sort of very international, very cosmopolitan place, and it's kind of, there's a huge amount of kind of intellectual excitement in research, I think.
And it's got to be quite supportive as well, because, there's literally, 29 or so other PhD students starting at the same time as you, who are all probably experiencing the same thing, and you all sort of lift each other when you're struggling and accelerate when somebody's doing well, and that's quite nice. It's a nice little community of thoughts.
Yeah. Do you have a...
Well, perhaps remark also the amount of knowledge that you will get, not only related to your specific topics, but also things related to the topic that you are researching, because you will have to read a lot in order to try to improve your own work. The amount of different things that you will learn at the end of your PhD. It's always surprising all the different things that are kind of related, or all the people that are working either in the same thing or things related that you are doing. So you will learn. You will learn a lot in those 3 years.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good place to close it. Well, thank you so much for coming, and I hope that I will see some of you next year starting your new PhDs. And yeah, if you have any further questions, then please come and talk to me.